Welcome back to Connection Point Studies. We're glad to have you along. We've been doing this series, Making Your Dreams Come True. We've seen some really cool things happen, people's dreams coming true.
Yeah.
Our hope is that as you study this and as you put this to action in your own life, some of your own dreams will come true. And you've got a little quote, as always.
Yeah,
now, this one's an interesting one.
Oh, this is a cool one. German philosopher and author Franz Kafka said, we are sinful, not merely because we have eaten of the tree of knowledge, but also because we have not yet eaten of the tree of life. The state in which we find ourselves then is sinful, quite independent of guilt.
Okay, always interesting quotes. You can think about that, talk about it. But here's what we always do. 10 or 12-minute question that you have everyone in your group answer. We want everybody to answer it. The purpose of this is for you to get to know each other. Why do we do that, Ron? Just to remind people.
Well, you know, connection groups are about connecting, and we learn about each other and our lives and what we do, so connect.
Right, and really, Ron, let's be honest. If they don't get through the whole study here right today,
it's okay.
It's okay, because if they connected, that's really the most important thing they do.
Yeah.
So we have this connection question for you. I'll let you give it to them, Ron.
All right, so the question is, it's, you know, the new year, and some of you may have made some New Year's resolutions. So what is one New Year's resolution that you've tried but failed to keep? Could be this year, could be a previous year. And you had another
yeah,
part
I'm going to add to that.
Yeah, okay.
What's one that you kept? And then I want to have you answer why. Why did you keep it or not keep it? And you'll have a great time talking about that.
Okay, and then before you come back, read Romans 7 through 25. Just kind of make some observations. And really, the question I want to know is there anything surprising about this? As you read it, are you going like, wow, that surprises me?
That'll take you time, but we'll get back to you at Connection Point Studies. Okay, Ron, I think you've probably made some New Year's resolutions this year. Which ones have you kept?
You know, actually, I haven't.
You didn't make any?
No. I'm pretty happy with myself, so I'm just.
Are you not doing anything, Ron? Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna lose some weight. So there's some. I got 5 or 6 pounds that I want to lose right in this first part. And so.
Well, that's a continuing, ongoing process for me.
Okay, everyone has their resolutions, and whether you kept them or not. Hopefully, that was a good discussion. But this scripture in particular is kind of a fascinating scripture. What stands out? What's surprising to you about this scripture?
Well, you know, all along as Paul's been writing, he's been talking about you and all of the things that happen to you, and all of a sudden he switches to I.
Yeah.
And he starts getting very personal.
He tells his struggle.
Yeah, and in fact, you're going, what? Paul, apostle, guy that wrote a third of the New Testament?
Met God on the road, you know.
You're telling me you struggle? I can't believe it.
Yeah, and he really did struggle. I mean, he was honest. He's saying, I fall. I have really fallen and messed up in my life. And maybe that's helpful. Is it helpful?
It's good to know that he's real.
Yeah. So what we want to do now is actually dig in a little deeper to this passage as we look through the whole thing. So the first question that we ask is kind of similar to all the rest of the studies, right?
Yeah, Paul's been doing this little pattern where he asks a question, then he answers it. He asks a question, then he answers it. So once again, there is a question that starts this passage. And when he asks a question, I always want to know, why is he asking this? So that's the first part. What is the question, and why is he asking it?
Okay, and we'll come back. Okay, so the question, Ron, is pretty simple.
He says, is the law sin?
Yeah.
Now, Paul's been pretty hard on the law. And throughout he's been saying, like, the law holds you captive, the law kills, can't save you. And Jewish people, you remember in Psalm 119 says, oh, how I love your law.
Psalm 1.
Yeah.
All of that, yeah.
So for them, it would be like, what, Paul? You're saying the thing we love, you're saying it's sin? Is that what you're saying?
He's saying the law is bad. He's saying, is the law bad? Now, really, how does he answer that? I think he answered it as saying, it's not, right?
Well, that's the next question, actually. But before we answer that, let's give them a crack at it. So what does Paul conclude about the law? You find this in verses 7 through 13.
See if you agree with me. Okay, verses 7 through 13, he does kind of answer that, and I kind of gave him a clue. He's saying that the law is not wrong.
Right.
And why is he saying that? And how do we dig that out
the law reveals sinful acts. Now, I found it really interesting when, sometimes the Bible uses words like transgression or trespass. Remember in the old King James, trespass? It's actually, the Greek word that's translated that way is the notion of crossing a line. So, the old, if I draw a line in the sand, you cross that line, you don't cross that line. Well, if the line is not there, you don't know you're crossing it, right?
Yeah, and that's what the law does.
The law draws the line and says, you're crossing it, baby.
Well, and the other word for sin, it talks about hitting the mark. Really, it's like the law puts the mark on the bullseye, right? It's all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's the mark I'm supposed to hit, and I'm aiming for it, and I don't hit it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the law, on the one hand, draws the line, but on the other hand, it reveals something about us, because here you are knowing where the line is, and you find yourself crossing it. And Paul says, I struggle with this because I don't want to cross the line, but I keep crossing it. And he says, this law reveals there's a power in me.
There's something working.
There's something at work.
Something else happening. And it happened a long, long time ago, which is really what the next question kind of is about. Have you ever felt the way that Paul describes his feelings? So Paul's kind of sharing his feelings. How about you? Have you felt that same way? And you can look at that same passage and talk about it. And we'll come back and talk about it. So, Ron, I think we probably both have felt that way, haven't we?
Anybody who's honest would have to say, and there was a time when I was younger that, good people didn't admit that they felt like that.
I was around people that pretended they didn't have this problem.
But if Paul did it, I can say it too. I struggled with this.
Yeah, and we always have to be honest about our struggle. And I think sometimes that takes away the power of the struggle, don't you? Once you get it out into the light, it seems to take away the power of that sin and that thing in our life.
I'm just sick of pretending. I don't want to pretend. Let's be real here. We all struggle with that. In fact, Paul is in addressing this. He says he is addressing this problem. How can somebody who's been forgiven, who says they love God, who has a law, how do we?
How do they keep crossing the line?
So he uses a pattern to explain this, and it's a little tricky to figure out the pattern. If you have some trouble, we have it in the answers. There's a little table that shows you all the answers, but there's two parallel statements that we see repeated over and over again. See if you can figure them out, and we'll come back and tell you.
Okay, Ron, you did put this in the cheat notes to make it easy for everyone. They could focus on it at 7:14. And then the first part, and then the second part, and then 25, or exactly.
Well, so let's think of what the statements are. The statements are, the law is good. And we see this in verse 14, the law is spiritual. Verse 16, I agree, the law is good. Verse 22, in my inner self, I joyfully agree with the law of God. Verse 25, I'm a slave to the law of God. Paul's like, it's not sin, the law is good. But then he also acknowledges that I have this indwelling sin problem. Again, in verse 17 or 14, I'm sold into sin's power. Verse 17, it's sin living in me. Verse 23, it wages war and takes me prisoner. Verse 25, I'm a slave to the law of sin. So we see this, the law is good, but I have indwelling sin.
And this is such a great contrasting thing. I hope they take a chance to really look at this in the notes, because they kind of go one right after the other, and it makes a lot of sense. So what does Paul say is the solution? That's what we want you to think about. You can look at Romans 7:25. What's the solution to this overall problem? Okay, Ron, this is the $1,000,000 question. How do you solve this thing? Theologians haven't always agreed on this, have they?
No, they haven't agreed on the details, but they agree on one thing.
Really?
The answer is Jesus.
Kind of like the old Sunday school thing where you say, raise your hand. It's Jesus. You know, that's always the right answer, right?
What's important about understanding this problem is a lot of people come to Christ and they come with an expectation like, oh, now I'm a Christian, I'm, no more struggle. And then they find that struggles are just beginning, and it seems like as you go farther along, you think, I've been a Christian for a long time and I still struggle.
Yeah.
And so I think what's good about this is it helps us understand that this is a process. Paul struggled with it. I struggle. You struggle. We've got this indwelling sin problem. Yes, we've been forgiven. And we're going to find out more details about the solution when we knock over into chapter 8 next week.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's good. It's a good chapter. It's a great chapter. But really, the bottom line is, if you're struggling in the middle of an interpersonal, deep inner battle, and you just keep crossing the line and you just don't know what to do, there is a great solution, and that's Christ. And he comes in us. He helps us. With our relationship to him, he helps us. And if you don't know that, you need to know that today. And hopefully you'll have a chance to share together, pray together. If you're brave a little bit and can be a little bit honest and you guys can keep confidences, it's a good time for you to share as a group about things you struggle with and a chance for you to pray for each other and encourage each other. So take a little bit of time to do that, pray, and wrap up. And we'll see you next week at Connection Point Studies.